The moment my sister walked back into my mother's house alone, I felt a chill run through my chest. It wasn't panic, not yet. Just a quiet, terrifying feeling. I looked at the empty space beside her. At the doorway where a small hand should have been swinging. At the spot near her hip where Ruby always stood because my daughter was 5 and trusted everyone in that house. Where is Ruby? Sienna placed her bag on the table without looking at me. Sienna. My voice came out dry. Where's my daughter? She tilted her head, as she always does when she wants to make you feel like you're in the wrong. Then she smiled, not a warm smile, not even a polite one, and said words I'll never forget. Oh, sorry. I must have forgotten it at the store. Silence fell over the room. I glanced at my mother, Margaret, who was standing at the kitchen table, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. Her eyes met mine and she said calmly, as if we were discussing ordering pizza, "Don't worry, you'll find it there eventually." Then Sienna laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a guilty one. A genuine laugh, the kind she'd been holding back ever since she'd come in. Perhaps she'd learned not to steal the spotlight from Maeve. At that moment, I realized that nothing in that house was an accident. Every hurtful comment, every comparison, every time Ruby was ignored, neglected, or made to feel overwhelmed, it was all intentional. They deliberately left my 5-year-old daughter alone in a department store and laughed about it. What happened next? The hours Ruby spent crying at the customer service desk, the phone call I made, the way their lives fell apart. That's what this story is about. I need to tell you who I was before that night, because it matters. My name is Sloan, I'm 32. I work in insurance by day and do accounting for small businesses by night. I live in a 2-bedroom flat with my daughter Ruby, a dying succulent I refuse to throw away, and a collection of mismatched coffee mugs that somehow tell the story of my 20s. I'm not dramatic, and I don't make a scene. I was raised to keep the peace, which in my family meant accepting whatever Sienna and my mother wanted to say. Eller's father, Julian, left 2 weeks before her first birthday. He texted me from the front door, saying he wasn't ready for this. He drove off in his car full of his things and an empty apology, and I never heard from him again except for the legal paperwork. My mother's response was, "You should have seen the marks, Sloan." My sister added, "At least she's a pretty baby." That was the pattern. That was always the accepted norm. Sienna was 3 years younger than me, and she had built the life my mother had always dreamed of for herself. A suburban house, a settled husband, a daughter named Maeve who wore matching hair ribbons and knew how to sit quietly during grown-up conversations. My mother, Margaret, adored that life. She spoke of Maeve's dance and Sienna's kitchen renovations with the same fervor as some might speak of religion, with complete devotion and without a hint of doubt. Ruby and I were mere footnotes. We were invited to dinner parties. Yes, we were technically included in the photos, but the warmth was conditional. The moment Ruby laughed too loudly, interrupted a conversation, or needed a distraction from Maeve, you could feel the temperature drop. I noticed it. I should have left earlier, but I kept telling myself that grandmothers and aunts were worth fighting for. That Ruby deserved to know her family. And that if I were patient, kept quiet, and kept showing up, things would get better. It did not soften, but rather intensified. It was a Tuesday evening in March when everything exploded. Maeve's 7th birthday was approaching, and my mother had arranged a small family dinner to kick off what she called Maeve's birthday week. That phrase alone said it all. A birthday week for a 7-year-old. Ruby was brought along anyway because she'd asked to come, because she liked her cousin despite everything, and because I truly believed a child's birthday was a neutral occasion. Even Margaret and Sienna could set aside their silent cruelty for a single dinner. Ruby wore her favorite yellow cardigan. She'd spent time that morning choosing it, holding it up to the window to check its color in the natural sunlight, just as she does with things she loves. Dinner began as usual. Politely, simply, like a veneer covering old scratches. Margaret had prepared a full meal. Candles were on the table. Maeve sat at the head of the table, already in her birthday mood, putting on a show for everyone, like children do when they've learned that attention is something to be collected. Ruby sat next to me and ate quietly. I noticed her glancing at Maeve, not out of jealousy, but with the tender, genuine admiration that 5-year-olds have for older children. Ruby found Maeve wonderful. She always had been. Halfway through dinner, Sienna announced she wanted to take Maeve to the store for a present, something she'd promised all week. Then, before I could process what was happening, she turned to Ellery with a bright smile. "Ruby, do you want to come? We're going to make it a girls' trip." Ellery's face lit up. She looked at me. "Can I, Mom?" My gut feeling said no. I can't explain it any better. There was something automatic and instinctive inside me that wanted to say no. But I looked at Sienna's smile, at Ellery's hope, at Mom nodding across the table, and I silenced that gut feeling. "Sure," I said. "I'll be back in an hour." Ruby gave me a hug before she left. She smelled of the watermelon shampoo we'd used that morning. They walked out the front door. I cleared the plates, helped Mom in the kitchen, and we chatted about nothing important. Time passed. I texted Kasha. No reply. I called, but the phone went to voicemail. I tried again. I went back to the living room and found Sienna standing there, her bag on the table. Ruby wasn't in sight, acting as if she'd just returned from a routine errand. You know what she said, so there's no need to repeat it. What I want to tell you is what happened inside me in the seconds after she left. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something colder, more focused. Like a door closing quietly in a room inside my chest. I felt myself slipping away from the version of me that still wanted these people to like me, and into something else entirely. I grabbed my purse and keys. I didn't say another word to either of them. I drove to the store. I found her at the customer service counter near the main entrance. She was sitting on an orange plastic chair, the kind with metal legs, holding a toy dog that one of the store employees had given her. There was a smear of something on the sleeve of her yellow cardigan. A sample of chocolate from the confectionery section, I later discovered, because a kind employee had taken her around and tried to comfort her. She had been there for a long time. When she saw me, she didn't immediately burst into tears. She slid off the chair and walked over to me, and then something complicated came over her face. I felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a particular kind of sadness, like that of a child who had kept her feelings bottled up for too long. She buried her face in my jacket, and then finally let go. I held her in the middle of the store for a long time. The employee who stayed with her, a young woman whose name I think was Gina, told me that Ruby had asked 3 times if her aunt would be coming back. Each time, she had answered with a less certain yes. On the way home, Ruby was silent. About a mile from our apartment, she said, "Sienna deliberately forgot about me, didn't she?" I gripped the steering wheel. "Why do you think that?" Because she didn't seem remorseful. She was smiling as she drove off. She was 5 years old. She saw it before I allowed myself to see it. I said, "I don't know, my little one." I wasn't quite ready to agree to my 5-year-old daughter's request. But it doesn't matter why it happened. The important thing is that you're okay and that I came. She said, "You always come." Then she fell asleep clutching the toy dog she'd bought at the store. I'd bought it the next morning. I'd driven back and paid for it without telling her. I named it Oliver. And she still has it. Neither Margaret nor Sienna called me that night. Not the next morning. Not in the days that followed. When my mother finally got in touch, it was a text. "You've overreacted. Ruby's fine." Sienna texted nothing. I didn't answer either of them. Instead, I made appointments. I found a child therapist who specialized in stress responses. I documented the events of that night in writing. The times, the statements, everything I could remember. I kept every missed call locked away in my phone. I requested the store's customer service records, showing when Ruby was brought to the front desk, and when I picked her up. I didn't know then exactly what I was building, but I knew I was building something. For weeks, I kept quiet. But my mother escalated. It started with gentle hints, then longer texts, then a call from my aunt asking if I could speak to Margaret, just because the tension was affecting the whole family. Sienna sent Ruby a birthday card. Eiler's birthday was in April, along with a $20 bill, as if money could bridge the gap between what she'd done and what she wanted things to be like now. I deposited the $20 into Eiler's savings account. I didn't send a thank you note. Then my mother sent a letter. I read it once. She told me to fix what I'd broken. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened to Ruby, just an expectation that I'd fix things as I always had. I burned it over the kitchen sink. Then the call was made. Here's something people might not know about me. I spent 4 years at an insurance company learning exactly how organizations document risks. I know what paper records look like, and I know what it means for them to match. I spent those quiet weeks checking the accuracy of my records. My first call was to the company's customer service line at the store. I explained what had happened, referred to the customer service report from that night, and asked if the store had any protocol for incidents where a minor is brought to the front desk in such circumstances. They told me there was an official record, and that the employee who stayed with Ruby had written a report of the situation. This record would prove important later on. It was my second call with my lawyer. I want to make something clear. I'm not a litigious person. I've never been in a courtroom in my life, except for Julian's custody case, which didn't even go to a judge because he didn't object to anything. But I hired a lawyer because every parent with a small business should have one. I'd hired her 2 years ago to resolve a contractual dispute that ended before it even began. Her name was Monica. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said 3 things. First, what Sienna did legally constitutes child endangerment in our state. Second, Margaret's explicit statement, you'll find it there later, proves that the act wasn't accidental and that another adult had prior knowledge of it. Third, I have the right to obtain a restraining order restricting Sienna's contact with Ruby and to file a civil suit for damages for the documented emotional distress. I told her I wanted all 3. The official notice arrived at Sienna's house. I know this because she called me after it was delivered, It was her first call since the incident. Her voice was sharp and strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Sloan, what is this?" "It's exactly as written." "Are you serious?" "I've been serious since the moment I found my daughter sitting alone on that orange plastic chair." There was a long silence. "My mother will. I know this will affect my entire family." "I know, Sloan." I didn't think she was going to stop. I stayed calm. "Don't tell me you didn't think." "You did. You planned. You laughed. Ruby told me you were smiling when you walked out of that store without her. A 5-year-old saw that, Sienna. Don't tell me you didn't think." I started to cry then, and I want to be honest with you. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not cruelty, not guilt, just a kind of clear, steady stillness. "I have to go," I said. I hung up. What I didn't know then, and what I discovered in the following weeks, was that Sienna's husband, a reserved and organized man named Graham, had no idea what she'd done. She'd told him dinner had ended in an argument, but hadn't mentioned the store. When the official notification, detailing the incident in legal jargon, arrived, Graham read every word. He called Monica's office to get a timeline of events. Then he went home and asked Sienna to explain herself, but she couldn't. Graham had a daughter, and he adored Maeve, the father he'd planned his life to protect. The idea that his wife had left another child, a 5-year-old, alone in a public place, and then laughed it off, was simply unacceptable. So he left the house. I didn't celebrate it. I'm telling you this because it happened, and because the story wouldn't be complete without it. I didn't intend to end Sienna's marriage. I intended to protect my daughter. The consequences that followed were a result of Sienna's earlier choices. Margaret's mother's reputation crumbled more quietly, but in some ways more completely. She had spent years building her social identity around her family, her church congregation, and her circle of neighbors, the image of a caring, generous mother with 2 successful daughters and lovely grandchildren. When those around her began to learn, gradually, through conversations in places like church parking lots and grocery store aisles, that her younger daughter had left a 5-year-old alone in a shop and laughed about it, and that her older daughter had documented the incident and filed a lawsuit, that image began to crack. No one dared confront her, but the invitations stopped coming. The church committee she had chaired for years asked her to step aside until things calmed down. Her neighbor, who had been her closest friend for over a decade, stopped visiting her for coffee. Margaret had always believed that the family's reputation was a shield, but she was discovering, slowly and painfully, that it could also be evidence. I sent a letter to my mother. It wasn't angry or vindictive, just straightforward. I told her that I'd spent years believing that enduring her favoritism and Sienna's cruelty was the price of giving Eller a family, that I'd endured rejection after rejection because I thought love was something to be earned again and again from people who were supposed to give it so freely. I told her that Ruby had asked me at the age of 5 if she was a bad girl for being too talkative. I told her that this was the sentence I returned to whenever I doubted what I'd done. I told her that I didn't hate her. I told her that I hoped she had enough time to understand the difference between a family she'd built and a performance she'd given. I didn't ask for a reply. I didn't leave an address. Ruby is doing well. She goes to therapy regularly and comes home to tell me about the games she played and the things she drew. She still colors pictures of houses, but lately she's started drawing people outside of them, standing in yards, walking down streets, figures with open arms. Her therapist says that's a good sign. She still has Oliver, the stuffed dog she bought from the shop. He sits on her pillow every morning, and she puts him in her backpack on days when she says she might need more rest. She doesn't ask about Kasia or Margaret. Once, she asked me if Grandma Margaret liked us. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I said, I think she liked the idea of us being together. The real us were more than she knew how to handle. Ruby thought about that. That's sad for her, she said. I nodded. Yes, Pew, it is. I won't tell you that everything is easy now, that we have days without anything difficult happening to us. Ruby still has difficult moments, a look that sometimes crosses her face in crowded public places, and a silence that descends upon her when I suddenly leave the room, reminding me of what that evening cost her. We're slowly getting through it together, one therapy session after another, one bedtime talk after another. What I'm going to tell you is this. The version of her that stood in my mother's kitchen burning that letter, she wasn't the type to engage in dramatic behavior. She was someone who had kept silent for a long time, and finally realized that silence itself was a choice. Protecting Ruby wasn't a decision she struggled with. It was the only option available to her. There is a particular kind of cruelty in using a child to punish her mother. To look at a 5-year-old who has done nothing but exist, and say that she threatens your daughter's position. Sienna and Margaret understood something about power. That the most effective way to reach me was through Ruby, but they didn't understand that it was a two-way street. The moment they touched my daughter, they gave me something I had never experienced before in that family, clarity. I knew exactly who they were. I knew exactly what I had to do. And I did it without question, without hesitation, and without the slightest regret. My mother's letter asked me to fix what I had broken. I want to answer that now. Obviously, to anyone who has received a letter like that from someone they have hurt, I didn't break anything. I documented what was already broken. Then I stopped standing in front of it, pretending it was whole. If you're sitting somewhere right now, in a parked car, in a lounge, or lying in bed at night, protecting someone who constantly asks you to forgive people who are still hurting you, I want you to hear this. Forgiveness is yours to decide on your own terms and when it suits you, if it ever serves you well. And no one deserves forgiveness if they haven't first created a safe environment for you to forgive. Ruby recently made me a pie. She put 4 blueberries on top, arranged in a smiley face because, as she said, "That's what happy pie looks like, Mum. This is what we've built from everything they left us. A 2-bedroom apartment, a dying succulent, a stuffed dog named Oliver, and happy pie every Sunday morning. It's more than enough. It's everything. So let me ask you something.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं। ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं। तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है। दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है। अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं। ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं। तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है। दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दर्द भरता है। मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं। तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं। कहाँ जाऊँ कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी ही रूह का मका तू। लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था। वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था। सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा, मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा। बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत। मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत। साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर। साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर।